and the Shoshone tribe have a long and illustrious history in northern Utah. Can you tell us a little bit about that history and also how you're associated with them?
I will. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking. I serve as the chairman today for the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. I guess the modern-day chief, you could say. Our tribe is indigenous to northern Utah, southern Idaho. You might think, well, that's a pretty big geographical area. Our people traveled in that geographical area as there were food sources that were plentiful. But the major place that they lived was the Cache Valley. And anyone who's ever been to Cache Valley knows that why it was so important with the water, all the fresh streams and lakes, animals, plenty of game that could be had, and then wild seeds and berries that could be found in the mountains.
So what time of the year would you find yourself coming into Cache Valley?
Cache Valley was almost always home, served as a home base. They would travel to the eastern Shoshone tribe in Wind River when they would hunt buffalo with their cousins from the east. In the fall, they would travel to the Pinyon Pine area of Nevada and collect pine nuts, which was a major food source for the winter. They would go north to the Salmon River when the salmon were in the river. But for the most part, that was the geographical area that they traveled. They wintered in the Cache Valley. Now, if you live in the Cache Valley, you're thinking there are better places to spend the winter. But they would winter along the Bia-Ogai, or what you call the Bear River. They did that because of the many hot springs that were located.
That makes perfect sense, right?
Sure. Have a hot bath every morning is a perfect place to be. And in the winter, all their time was spent being with family in their lodging, and not a lot of time was spent finding food sources. All of that work was done prior to winter, so they could spend a lot of time playing games and just spending time resting and being with family.
So it sounds idyllic, and one of the reasons it probably was idyllic was because there were no other people there. It was your tribe and your tribe's cousins, I'm sure all sort of related, but there were no white people to come in and start causing trouble for you.
That's exactly right, until 1856. Brigham Young was sending out scouts to find different areas that the saints could move. More and more saints were arriving to Salt Lake, and from there they flocked to that area and brought their cattle, which was a big deal to us because our people relied upon the game and the wild seeds for food. When you start putting up fences and bringing 2,000 cattle, those food sources are now depleted. The pioneers are hunting for the same game that you had relied upon for your whole life. So it was kind of two different people with two different ways of life, trying to share a place that had very limited resources. So
it was kind of inevitable, wasn't it, that something was going to go wrong?
It was inevitable, and Sagwitch, in those early days, Peter Mon wrote a letter to Brigham Young calling Sagwitch the friendly one, because Sagwitch showed those early pioneers what roots were edible, where they could find different choke cherries and things of that nature. So his relationship to the local Mormon pioneers was actually very, very good. And
now you are, let's just say this right now because it's very exciting, you are actually Sagwitch's great-great-great-grandson?
That's correct.
Right, so you're a direct descendant?
I am.
Okay.
And I'm a direct descendant of his third wife.
Okay.
Sagwitch over time ended up having 5 wives.
Okay.
And actually practiced polygamy back in the day, if you want to look at it that way.
Right.
They looked at it as a way of there were more women and children than men, and it was a way of taking care of those women that were husbandless and fatherless.
And just something that your people had always done, I'm sure.
Always. They just provided for those people. That is Chief Sagwitch. And his 5th wife, Biwochi. She was Bear Hunter's widow. Bear Hunter was one of the main chiefs with Sagwitch during the massacre at Bear River. He was tortured in a really terrible way, and ended up alone. So Sagwich's wife was murdered during the massacre.
Well, one of many.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they ended up marrying each other. They're actually the first Indian couple to go through the LDS endowment session, and they were the first Lamanite couple to be sealed.
How did that happen?
Came full circle. The funny thing is, after the massacre, you'd think Sagwich would completely get out of the area and leave.
Yeah.
He didn't. He stayed in the area. Those Mormon pioneers were his friends for the most part. I mean, there was problems, interaction between the two.
Right.
Most of the problems, though, were with other tribes. Chief Pocatello, which was from more southern Utah, his band was not friendly at all with the Mormon pioneers.
Yeah.
But I think the Mormon pioneers looked at the Indian as an Indian. They didn't realize
Hopefully at the time.
Yes, at the
Not
time.
now.
They didn't realize that there were different bands and different groups, and some were friendly and some were not.
Well, just like the pioneers themselves. I'm sure you found some that were friendly to others and then some that they were just mean.
In fact, there was a grocery store owner in Franklin, Idaho, that came to Sagwich 2 days before the massacre and said, the Mormon pioneers sent a letter to Salt Lake and the troops are on their way to take care of the problem. And that's what the Mormon pioneers thought. They were coming to take care of the problem. I'm not sure they understood and realized what taking care of the problem meant to Patrick E. Connor. They handed him arrest warrants when he left Salt Lake City, and he said, "Don't bother. There's not going to be anybody alive to arrest."
So he came with the idea that they were going to just kill everybody in sight and call it good.
Absolutely. And to get back to your question, so Sagwich had that good relationship with the people in the valley. After the massacre, Sagwich stayed in the area, worked for the farmers, broke horses, worked on ranches and helped people. 10 years after the massacre, Sagwich was in his teepee one night, and according to history and a family tradition, Sagwich was visited in a dream by 3 men who told him the existence of a God among the Mormon people, and that he was told that he needed to send someone to Salt Lake, and they would tell him in Salt Lake what they needed to do. They needed to quit their Indian ways and learn the ways of the white man. The next day, Sagwich sent his son, Yeager, who was 12 during the massacre.
So Yeager survived.
So he survived by playing dead for 3 hours, laying on that frozen killing field. And his grandmother told him to do that, and his life was spared because of it. So,
She killed?
No, she survived as well. Yeager ended up going to Salt Lake. He was told that missionaries would come as soon as they were available. As you can imagine, there were probably not that many missionaries that spoke Shoshone, and the Shoshone didn't speak English, so it was important that that was worked out. About 6 months later, in the spring, in May, there was a man living in Ogden, Utah. His name was George Washington Hill. He had been, 10 years previous to that, a missionary to a group of Shoshone people in central Idaho, the Limhi Shoshones. He'd served a mission for 3 or 4 years among those people. He spoke the language fluently. He was called in one day by Brigham Young and said, "I've got a heavy load on my shoulders, and I want to give, it's going to be your load now.
Okay.
I want you to go find the local Shoshone tribe that's now living in northern Utah, up by Corinne and Brigham City, and I want you to be a missionary and teach them the gospel." And
that's how that came about. That's fascinating. I had no idea. I'm sure most people don't, you know.
No, it's not readily known, and it's not readily known in church history. And to me, it's just as significant as some of the Mormon pioneer stories we hear of them coming across the plains.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
there's such a rich history there that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
And so
I suppose part of the problem is, as I understand it, you just didn't write things down. This was passed down from grandmother to grandson, perhaps, and down like that by word of mouth.
that's absolutely, it's all oral history in our culture until my grandmother came along. My grandmother was sent to a boarding school early on in her life, where the motto of the school, if you can imagine this, was kill the Indian to save a child. What that meant was if she spoke about her culture or spoke her language in any way, they would punish her, beat her. And so they thought if they could take the Indian out of the child, it would save that child down the road. And so that's how she grew up. The funny thing is, she came back and started writing down. Well, she kept getting educated.
Right.
She ended up graduating from Bear River High School. She got her English degree from LDS Business College. Wow. And so she started writing down all of the stories and all of the things that she'd been told by her grandfather, Jaeger. Yeah. And so we now have a rich history of every little story that, frankly, a lot of tribes lose out on today because of the oral history aspect of things. Yeah. So I have all my grandmother's notebooks, all of her writings are in my possession. Oh, wow. And I just read and read and read and hear those stories over and over again. But I was lucky enough to be kind of raised by her. My parents both worked, and I spent a lot of time at her home, and she would teach me to bead. She would teach me how to brain tan a deer hide and how to make moccasins and gloves. And she'd sit down with me and tell me how the sun got its name or how the coyote would still fire. And so those stories were always ingrained in me at an early
magical age. To a child, I would think.
Yes, and going behind her home and seeing these deer skins laid out in various stages of brain tanning. And then to go in her home and smell that buckskin that had been smoked prior to her making something was just magical to me. Yeah,
I mean, I bet you can smell those things right now, and they take you right back.
And she made things like the dress. Some of that buckskin dress is a result of that deer hide, and how beautiful it is, and that is just magical to me.
Oh, definitely, yeah, and something that you can pass on now. Who's the last photo of?
The last photo is Jaeger ended up joining the church, and his father, Sagwitch. Jaeger ended up having 10 boys throughout his lifetime, and he was a member of the church now, and he named them all Book of Mormon prophet names. So one of his boys' name was Moroni, and that picture right there is Moroni. The significance of Moroni is my great-grandfather. The little girl on his wife's lap is my grandmother.
The same grandmother that raised you?
Stories.
Okay.
And so, and the other significant thing about Moroni was he was made the first Lamanite bishop in the church since the church was restored by Joseph Smith. So in the modern dispensation of time, Moroni was called to be the first Lamanite bishop. And served in that capacity for a lot of years. So
you have just a fascinating history, kind of a little bit on both sides. I mean, your Native American history, but then this kind of Western history, pioneers and all that kind of coming in, infringing upon your own history.
Absolutely. So my grandmother was full-blooded Shoshone, but her husband was full-blooded Welch. And then his family had joined the church from Wells. And had ended up being in Malad, Idaho. Right. And then this little Indian girl met this little white boy from Malad, because our native people, after they joined the church, moved on to a church-owned farm in northern Utah, and we called it Washakie, after the great eastern Shoshone chief. And the church taught us to farm, taught us to be members of society. We were now Mormons at that point. And so the church called a school teacher from Malad. And this school teacher, his last name was Parry, he brought his little boy to school every day. And
that's your last name, right? Okay.
So my grandmother met my grandfather as little children going to this one-room schoolhouse at Washakie. In fact, my grandfather, who was all Welch, died. But at his funeral, they said he was more Shoshone than some of the Shoshones. Because he knew more songs, he knew the language, even though he'd never been Shoshone, but he was raised among them, and he considered it part of who he thought he was.
Yeah, well, that's just a fantastic story, and I bet you've got lots more. We're going to break now and tell Darren thanks for sharing this fantastic history of his family, and we're going to pick up again a little bit, and we're going to talk about some more things. But for now, Darren, thanks so much.
They would tell me something and I'd say, huh? And then they'd tell me again and I'd say, huh? And they'd say, never mind. And I was thoroughly confused. I had no idea where to go. There are so many options.
Say the word pass.
And so I called and made an appointment.
Say the word red.
And I am here to tell you, it was like night and day. The minute I walked in the first place, but learning more about him, having him tell me a little bit about him and his qualifications. And I know he's a PhD, and I know what it takes to get a PhD. So I knew that he had spent many, many years and had a lot of experience. And then the hearing test was the thing that I thought, wow, he really knows what he's doing. Very, very well worth it, and I would recommend Dr. Daines to anybody, everybody.
Our people were camped along the Bear River, or Beaogi, which is why we like to say. Beaogi in Shoshone means big river.
Beaogi or Beaogi?
Beaogi.
Okay.
So they'd camped there for hundreds of years. Every winter, they spent the winter there. There were a couple of reasons why. One was the hot springs.
Okay.
The other that a lot of people don't realize is if Colonel Connor would have attacked that sleeping Indian village 2 weeks prior to, he wouldn't have found 500 Shoshones there as he did. He would have found about 3,000 Shoshones there. Oh. Other Shoshone tribes would come from everywhere, right, and they would perform what they called the warm dance. Okay. They would do that at the end of every January to help foster in a new spring. Okay. So our people were there.
Gosh, it's a pity, if I might just say, that they weren't all there, and things may have been different, but
it would have been different.
Yeah.
Sagwitch knew the military were coming. Okay. He'd always been able to negotiate a settlement with men throughout his lifetime, okay, and throughout his experience.
So he thought that it was going to happen again.
Well,
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure he didn't think they were going to come in and kill everybody that they found.
He did. 2 nights before the massacre, we had a medicine man by the name of Tindup. Okay. He had a dream, and he foresaw the calamity which was about to take place. In his dream, he saw his people being killed by pony soldiers. And he woke everyone up in the middle of the night, and he told Sagwitch, I had a dream, and I saw this happening to our people. Sagwitch said, those of you who believe the dream of Tindup can leave with Tindup and his family tonight. Okay. There were about 30 individuals that ended up leaving the area with Tindup, and their lives were spared. Right. Sagwitch knew they were coming. He thought he could negotiate a settlement if just wanted to talk. He thought if the military man was a just and a wise man that he could do that.
Honorable, which so clearly wasn't.
On the morning of January 29th, he got up as usual, surveyed the camp outside of his teepee, and he saw a mist along the bluff to the southeast. He didn't really realize what it really was, but as it moved and got closer to him, he realized that it was the horse's breath from sub-zero temperatures breathing.
Gosh, that must have been a hugely spooky sight, mustn't it? I mean, I can see it.
I can see it too. Yeah. And when I'm up there, I can look across that bluff and see exactly what he's seen. He woke everyone up that morning, and he told people that the military were there and refrained from shooting, refrained from doing anything until he had a chance to talk with him. Well, as the military got a little closer, they started firing upon Sagwitch and his people. And probably accounts say 2 to 3 hours later, Connor had butchered and murdered about, historians say 250, The number was closer to 450. Colonel Connor only counted the braves and the men within his count. And that says a lot right there.
Yeah,
but they killed men and women and children. And they did it indiscriminately. It didn't matter. And our people were butchered over the next few hours on that site and left to rot. So,
you know, that is so horrendous. That's one of the most horrible things I've actually ever heard, ever. Because it's that whole thing of innocence, isn't it? You think that you're going to be able to talk to somebody, and yet now you're faced with somebody who has no honor. I'm sure the Indian people at that time didn't even recognize a person like that didn't have any honor.
You're exactly right. I'm sure they didn't. They had no concept of it. So
it's horrible. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
That's silly for me to say I'm sorry 100 and some odd years later, but it's so moving.
Sure. It is. And when you reacted the way you did, a lot of people don't know about this.
Right.
This was the largest massacre of Native Americans in the history of the United States of America.
Where is it?
No one knows about it.
No, they don't.
And so...
well, shame on us, first of all, for that. Shame on us, because that should be a huge part. When the kids, I know my kids in school had to learn about American history. Coming from England, of course, I never knew anything at all about this, because we don't learn about American history. But my kids had to, and I'm pretty sure this was not on the curriculum.
No, it wasn't.
No.
And when you realize that, if you think about it, history is written by the victors.
Yeah, Winston Churchill
said that.
He did.
And when you keep that in perspective, and then you really understand why Native American histories are never written or never talked about. But that's why it's so important to me to shed light on the event.
Yeah.
Not because we're not looking to have things made right.
Well,
We're just,
who can do that?
We're just looking for, I feel like that those people who were massacred have a God-given right to be heard. Their stories need to be told. And I think there's lessons in life that you can learn from those stories. The Bear River Massacre does not define us today.
No. Well,
it just doesn't define who we are. We're not bitter. We're not angry. We have forgiven all of the past transgressions against our people. I'm sure back in the day it was hard for everybody. I'm sure we stole cattle and things from the Mormon pioneers. Our people were put in a very difficult situation to try to live the way they'd always lived, but now there were two different groups competing for the same resources. So it just wasn't ever going to work out for both groups to be there.
It really wasn't, but it seems to me, and I don't know anything about it, seems somebody could have behaved a little bit better than they did.
That's the ironic thing to me, because the Mormon people themselves had suffered so much hate and injustice as they traveled across the United States. It's hard.
A little empathy along the way, right?
You're right, and it's hard for me to believe that they would be found guilty of doing the same thing to our people. But that's okay. We've gotten over it. We've forgiven. We don't hold any grudges. It's just helps us focus in on what we can do today to be the people we want to be.
Okay.
We've forgiven. We're never going to forget.
No.
But we want people to just understand what happened and know about it.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, when we have the memorial event and things of that nature, we use it as a tool to educate people.
Yeah.
And not to feel guilty or sorry for us.
Right.
We just want you to know bad things happen to people throughout their life. And how you respond to those things will determine who you're going to be and determine your character.
Okay.
So it's important for us to move forward. I believe the most successful Native Americans today are those who can best balance culture and change. And we honor our culture, and we honor those who have gone before every day. They're in our thoughts and minds. But we realize that we live in an ever-changing world. And our tribe, the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation, is preparing our children to succeed with it by education and things. So.
Well, good for you, and that's what a fantastic way of looking at it, because I imagine that it would be hugely easy just to blame everybody in sight and carry that with your generation. I mean, a lot of people do. They do carry things forward to generation after generation, and you haven't done that. So you were talking a little bit about the memorial that you have every year. Yes. There is a certain site that is sacred to your people because it is the site of the massacre. But now you have kind of a little announcement to make here that things are kind of changing on that sacred site. Tell us about that, because this is very exciting. Tell us about this.
Oh, thank you for giving me the platform to do it. Forever, if you've gone to the site, there's an old monument there erected in 1932 by the Daughters of Utah Pioneers. Their plaque on it just says terrible things, and I think that even today they're
not politically correct, you're trying to say, in light of
they're even a little embarrassed by the
well, they should be. Let's face it, this is not a good thing for anybody to read these days, is it?
No, it's not. But so they put this monument up in 1932. It was meant to tell the story of what happened there. But think about this. This monument was erected 69 years after the actual event. And so, how accurate could you really be? And the problem with their narrative is if we're a stranger driving by on Highway 91 today, and we stop and read that plaque, the combatant Indians who were causing trouble, and the troops came in and took care of the problem.
That's what it says on the plaque.
Yeah. You could go away from there thinking, wow, that's really what happened. Those crazy Indians, they got what was coming to them. But is that really what happened?
I'm thinking probably not. Probably not, yeah?
You're right.
Yeah.
We've been relegated since that time to meet for our commemoration at that site. Okay. We've had no other site.
And you didn't own the site?
We didn't own the site.
So you had no control. And I'm sure, if we want to be nice to the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers, I'm sure they did it out of the best of intentions. I'm sure they didn't, I'm sure they're not a bunch of horrible old ladies sat getting together to try and make the situation worse. They probably did it out of the best of intentions. But they own it, and they've got control over what is on there. Which now, some years later, is really quite offensive. Yeah? It
is offensive, and they are good women, and it's a wonderful group.
Right.
And to put this on, I mean, it happened in 1932.
Yeah. They didn't know, let's face it. They just didn't know.
And back in those days, it was the Wild West, for heck's sakes. So we lived in a different time and age than we do today. So
now the good news.
We've forever met there and just sucked it up to meet there, knowing this plaque is always in the background.
Right.
I'm so happy to say that with our tribal businesses,
because this is excellent news,
our tribal businesses and fundraising efforts we've done over the last few years, we've been able to purchase the massacre site. 550 acres. I signed on the closing yesterday in Preston at 2 o'clock. And as of 2:30 yesterday afternoon, it was recorded in the courthouse, and our tribe now owns all of the massacres.
How does that make you feel? Did you just want to lay down and cry?
We did cry.
I'll bet you cried.
I was there with 5 other council members, and the title company was good enough to give us the room after we'd signed and closed.
You needed a minute.
We needed a few minutes to talk about our experience in going through that and being able to acquire it, but also being able in a quiet moment to give thanks to Dam Appa, which it means the Great Spirit, or our Heavenly Father, to just thank him for being able to acquire that site. One thing about when we joined the Mormon Church, we were not given land. We were not moved to a reservation, which is a good thing, but land base is important to Native Americans, and it kind of gives them a sense of identity, especially in the light that we think everybody took our land to begin with. So it's funny that we now own the land back that our people's bones still lay, but we've had to buy back our own land. I mean, when you think about it,
ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But that's okay. we're happy to do so, but now we're happy to just say that we own 550 acres of that.
Okay, so the question is,
site.
it is sacred. The question is, how is it going to look now?
We've already been working with Utah State University, with their Natural Resources Department, to put together a plan that will allow us to return the site to what it looked like in 1863.
Oh my.
Bring plants that are not there anymore back, a lot more willows, get rid of the Russian olive trees that are there, that were an invasive species really, and be able to return it as close to as we can get it to what it looked like. And we're going to start fundraising efforts to build an interpretive center on the sites with a walking trail that goes down along the river to the hot springs, that'll have a kiosk that'll tell the story. This is what took place here, and this is, and just leave it as beautiful and quiet and as sacred as it is today. But that's the plan in the next couple of years, to be able to do that.
You must feel such a sense of accomplishment that this has happened on your watch. And so really, you know, many, many congratulations that you've been able to pull this together. And are you inviting people to stop by just as they're kind of maybe passing and maybe learn the real truth of what happened?
That would be the goal.
Yeah.
I speak at, I think last year I spoke at 46 different elementary schools.
Oh my.
And I do it free of charge, and I do it to anyone who asks. But I'll come and talk about our history, because it's important that children and everybody understand, because there's some learning that can take place. Even for us older adults, there's things that we can understand and learn.
There's some kind of suspicious field trips that children go on these days, and you think, I wonder why they're going there. Sure. What more of a perfect outing? And I feel like every child in the state, both states, Idaho and Utah, should be sent along and learn the real truth of the history of your people. Absolutely. And we will have that place that it'll be a place of learning that we can all share. And it's not lost on me that when we put that up there, it'll be the Shoshone perspective. Yeah. And the Shoshone perspective is not everyone's perspective. It's just our perspective. Right. But it's a perspective that's never been heard before. It needs to be told, because it's just been the sort of white version of everything, and that was just their perspective up until now. So I'm sure that, as you said earlier, there's a little bit of both, you know, there's a little bit of truth from every, but your people were massacred, but in an unspeakable way that that gentleman who did that has a lot to answer for. I'm not even sure I'd call him a gentleman. But what a fantastic thing. Now you've kind of come full circle, and you would love people to get out there and see this spot, maybe especially in a year or two when you've got everything that you're planning now in place. That's right. We want to bring as many people as we can to the site, just as a place of learning, and a place that people can go and say, a terrible event happened here hundreds of years ago. But look at it today. What can we learn from that horrible, terrible experience? What can we learn today, and how can we help? Just because, you know, history repeats itself if we're not careful. Even though you think it never will, but it does. And so for you guys to have this peace and this strength of mind now that you're saying, we don't want history to repeat itself, we want to move on and be in the spirit of forgiveness and just in that sacred place. It's just a wonderful, I'm going to go up and say it for sure. Good. You're always invited. Thank you. If you need a tour guide, call me and let me know. I'll meet you there. I love to take people there and show them the sacred things that are there. And you didn't have to be there at the massacre to know that a terrible injustice took place on the site. When you're there today, you can feel it. If you're quiet and listen. My grandmother would always tell me, if you're there at just the right time in the evening, you can sit and you can hear the cries of the little ones crying for their mothers. And it's almost true. As you sit there in the evening one time and it's really quiet and all you hear is nature around you, that you can tell something significant happened in that spot. And we just want to be able to educate those who don't know about it, Well, it
and
sounds like something significant is still happening in that spot, because the generosity of spirit that the Shoshone people have to be able to move on and forgive those people that did such terrible, terrible things, I think is something that maybe we all want to experience. Thank you, Darren, so much for sharing all this wonderful and very tragic history with us. And if you get a chance, if you're driving along, or even if you want to make a day of it, get in your cars and drive out there and learn the real history of this sacred place. Darren, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
They say a heart attack feels like a ton of bricks on your chest, and they aren't kidding. Luckily, I was taken to a Mountain Star hospital. They're the only hospitals in Utah with accredited chest pain centers. That's what made this moment possible. Their expertise was the difference between life and death. I'm living proof.
Before every moment counts, choose a health plan that partners with the Mountain Star Healthcare Network.
Not bigger, just better.
Honey, what's a word for large blaze?
Fire.
Oh, 13 letters.
Fire.
13 letters.
Really big fire.
Conflagration. Seen it, covered it. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two.
We are farmers. Bum, 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 bum.
Give us a call at 752-9493. You'll be glad you did.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here with you today. For the past, I've been serving as Lieutenant Governor for the past 4 years, and every year I tell Darren, I promise we're going to come. We really want to be here. Usually this coincides with the opening of our legislative session, which makes it very difficult. This year we were lucky. The session opened a week earlier, and so we were able to come up today. And as I've been preparing for this day and thinking about it and reading about the history of what happened here, as we came over the bluff and saw this little valley here, in my mind's eye, I tried to picture what it might have been like on that cold, terrible morning when this unspeakable tragedy occurred. There are lessons that we can learn from that tragedy, and lessons that need to be learned. This is a story that needs to be told. It's not something that we should hide, that we should forget about. It's something that we should speak about so that it never occurs again. There is so much history here, and I believe I was very excited to hear that the tribe was able to purchase additional land here, because I believe in foundations and I believe in roots, and I believe that we all have this desire and this tie to become closer to our ancestors, to those that have come before us, those who sacrificed to get us to be who we are and where we are. And this location has so much special significance for so many of you, and I'm grateful that that land will be preserved for generations to come, so that so many will be able to return here and remember what happened, remember those lives that were lost, and remember the legacy that was left. But just as we should remember those who have passed, I think it's also important to reflect on those that survived in that bitter cold, in the ice, the cold water, the ice, those that hid and were able to come out of that terrible circumstance, and the legacy that they've left. A legacy of faith, a legacy of forgiveness, a legacy of strength. We have so many members. People ask, so what is Utah doing here in Idaho? But if you know your history, this was part of the Utah Territory at the time of the massacre. And so Utah has a unique history and a unique tie to this place and to this tribe and to the legacy of these tribal members. And so it is with our friends from Idaho that we pause today to remember the lives that are lost. And it is my hope today that as we pause to reflect, wherever you come from, whatever your background is, that we'll reflect on those lessons, that we'll remember that we are all brothers and sisters here on this earth, that we are all human beings, that we all belong together. It doesn't matter what our race is, what our ethnicity is, it doesn't matter who we are, male or female, what our sexual orientation is, whoever we are human beings, and we are brothers and sisters, and that matters more than anything else. And I hope that lesson will carry with us, that we will continue to, that we will remember, that we will treat each other with kindness, that that we will treat each other with love and respect, the love and respect that every human being deserves. So on behalf of the governor of the great state of Utah, on behalf of the 3 million citizens of the state of Utah, thank you so much for doing this today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the legacy that you've left. We're so grateful for the members of the tribe that live and reside in Utah and are part of the important fabric that makes us who we are. Thank you so much, and may God bless all of you.
When you freeze something,
it's for later.
But how much later?
There's no way to be sure!
But Wendy's is sure that if you want a juicy, delicious hamburger right now, it should be made with fresh, never frozen beef, unlike some other guys. So that's what's in every single hamburger Wendy's serves, and the doubles and the triples. Because at Wendy's, fresh never gets old.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman, council members, and elders, it is an honor to be here. I'm Janet Gallimore, the Executive Director of the Idaho State Historical Society, and I'm very honored to be representing the Governor of Idaho today. Jim Johnston, who is our board member from this region, will be presenting this proclamation to the chairman as I read it. And want to thank you all for the amazing opportunity and your allowing us to work together with you on this site to help understand the site better, create additional knowledge, and help provide information and understanding to the public. At this time, I'll read the Governor's proclamation. Whereas on January 29, 1863, at Bear River in what is now Franklin County, Idaho, the California Volunteers under the command of Colonel Patrick Edward Connor attacked the encampment of the Northwest Band of the Shoshone Nation. And whereas on this day the Shoshone people suffered the most catastrophic loss of lives and property ever experienced by Idaho's native population. And whereas the Northwest Band of the Shoshone Nation speaks as the descendant community of the Bear River Massacre survivors. And whereas the Northwest Band of the Shoshone Nation has gained title to and manages, stewards, and interprets the site of the massacre and of their ancestral winter village, including the restoration of natural vegetation and the environment prevalent along the Bear River at the time of the tragedy. And whereas Idahoans acknowledge and seek to preserve their history and demonstrate their continued perseverance in creating Idaho's future. And whereas the state of Idaho recognizes that the Idaho State Historical Society has participated actively with the Northwest Band of the Shoshone Nation in supporting and furthering such efforts. And whereas the day of Bear River Massacre remembrance has been set aside for the people of Idaho to come together to honor their sacrifice as we remember those who lost their lives on January 29, 1863. Now therefore, I, C.L. Butch Otter, Governor of the State of Idaho, do hereby proclaim January 29, 2018 to be a day of Bear River Massacre remembrance in Idaho and designate the Idaho State Historical Society as the lead agency for the state in this commemoration. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused to be affixed the Great Seal of the State of Idaho at the Capitol in Boise on this 29th day of January in the year of our Lord 2018, and of the independence of the United States of America 242nd, and the statehood of Idaho the 128th. Signed, C.L. Butch Otter, Governor of Idaho. Thank you all so much.
thank you for coming and sharing this day with us. It's important to us that you're here, and we honor you for being here. What a historic day. Not only for everyone here, but for the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. It's a new day and it's a new dawning for the Shoshone Nation. I have felt the spirit of those that were here on that fateful day, and many spirits from many generations that have followed. I have felt them, and I've known that they've softened many hearts to make that land transition possible. And I believe with every fiber of my soul that they are here today. In 1932, the good people of Franklin County, many of them probably some of your relatives, erected a monument behind me on this site. They erected it 69 years, imagine that, after the actual event. They were well-meaning people who probably did this in a spirit of love and a spirit of bringing their community together. But I want you to know something. To me, what the monument really accomplished is that it gives the people that come to visit and learn a one-sided picture into what happened that day. It's not right or wrong. It just gives us one perspective. It gives people a reason to forget. If you're a traveler that just happened to be driving by and you stop and read the narrative on the plaque behind me, you could go away with an understanding, well, a narrow understanding of what took place here that day. It's like a view from a small window that was carefully placed to exclude a whole quadrant of a beautiful landscape. You only get to see what they want you to see. But is that the whole picture? What if the monument had been erected from the perspective of our people? And it would have been our voice that travelers see as they stop by. Would it look and read like what you see here today to my left? Would that be right or wrong? I suppose it depends on whose perspective you take. And I'm speaking mainly to you young adults from Preston Junior High today. I want you to remember that when you see a monument in the future, or have the chance to dive into a history book and read about a historical event, please take time to ask yourself this question. Is this the whole story? Or could there be another point of view? And then take time to learn about it. My wife and I drove up last night and we placed the teepee here to the south. I tried putting it over the top of that one, and that thing is too fat at the top. It wouldn't work. But I want you to know that I didn't mean any disrespect. I only wanted you to see and feel the contrast between two different perspectives today, and how easy it is for one voice to be heard at the expense of someone else's voice. It's easy in today's world to take offense, but please don't be offended. On that note, I always like to end my comments by teaching a little lesson of life. I don't know if you watched the news, but a couple of months ago, The President of the United States hosted some code talkers to his office. Navajo code talkers, tribal elders, wonderful men. And the President made a comment about a certain senator and called her Pocahontas. Well, the Navajo men looked a little puzzled. But you know what? If you watched the news that night, that was the story. That's what we remember. How offensive it was that he would do something like that in the presence of the code talkers. But I want you to know, to me, that wasn't the story. One of the Navajo code talkers' name was Thomas B. Gay. As he was flying home at Reagan Airport, he was recognized by a reporter who wanted another story. So he grabbed Thomas and said, I want to know what you thought when the President mentioned Pocahontas. And that wise tribal elder looked at him and said, well, I was a little puzzled. I didn't quite understand what he meant, but it didn't offend me. And then, not getting the story that he thought he was going to get, the young reporter turned around to walk away, and Thomas B. Gay grabbed his arm, and he said, let me tell you one other thing. When I served as a Marine, those white men would make us yell Geronimo every time we jumped out of an airplane. And with a smile and a laugh, he said, I wasn't offended then either. My lesson to you today is, we live in an offensive world. Every day when I turn on the TV, somebody tells me that I need to be offended by something or someone. But my message is, let's choose not to be offended. Let's choose to love one another. Let's choose to get along and accept one another for the values and things that we bring to the table. I am so grateful to serve our tribal family. I am grateful for a strong tribal council that works hard every day to change the lives of our people. And being able to acquire the massacre site is just such a blessing. Now, the only reason I'm going to say this is some of you have asked what we might do with the site. We're talking about that, but we'd love to restore the site to what it looked like in 1863. We would love to build an interpretive center somewhere on the site with walking trails that could be a place of learning and education, and people could come and see and hear the stories and feel of the spirit that's here. So in the next few months, we'll be starting a serious fundraising effort. And I want you to know that your contribution is tax deductible.
The coldest winter that we ever knew, it changed us for good. What becomes of a man who lives with blood on his hands like you do? Who gets your soul? And we must all forgive, but we must not forget, 'cause we're still standing here. You can leave us for dead, our ways like you do. But we're still standing here, and we must all forgive, and we must not forget the spirits of our dead remain with us today. 'Cause we're still standing here,
they would tell me something and I'd say, huh? And then they'd tell me again and I'd say, huh? And they'd say, never mind. And I was thoroughly confused. I had no idea where to go. There are so many options.
Say the word pass.
And so I called and made an appointment.
Say the word red.
And I am here to tell you, it was like night and day the minute I walked in the first place. But learning more about him, having him tell me a little bit about him and his qualifications. And I know he's a PhD, and I know what it takes to get a PhD. So I knew that he had spent many, many years and had a lot of experience. And then the hearing test was the thing that I thought, wow, he really knows what he's doing. Very, very well worth it, and I would recommend Dr. Daines to anybody, everybody.
I'm a new mom, so of course I did research on everything. I really wanted things to be a certain way, and they helped make that happen. They did a great job of keeping us comfortable and cared for, but the best part was being able to make my own choices. All leading up to this moment, the one I'll never forget.
Before your moment arrives, choose a health plan that partners with the Mountain Star Healthcare Network.
Not bigger, just better.
Not every rivalry is a fair fight. Like Wendy's beef with the other guys. While they thaw out, Wendy's goes all out, serving fresh beef for nearly 50 years, which is why true hamburger fans side with the official hamburger of the NCAA.
I think it is just trying to decide. It's on the line, but on the far right of the it is going to be
the training experience you never saw coming. The official training bike of the Tour de France, the 2015 Proform TDF, with an extra-large HD display plus a 20% incline and decline. Your training will climb to new heights. Only the TDF comes with iFit, powered by Google Maps, so your ride will be unlike anything you've ever experienced. Go to proform.com now and get the TDF for $0 down plus free shipping.
Ready to quit tobacco? Get started today by calling 1-800-QUIT-NOW.